Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Today I have my March reading wrap up. So for March I read 22 books. I think I read 22 books. Yeah, I read 22 books. 13 were historical romance, 8 were contemporary romance, and I had 1 paranormal romance. And within the contemporary romance there was like a mafia, there was a dark romance, most of them were just emotional contemporary reads because that's what I prefer. I read 3 arcs and I had 8 5-stars, so that's that's still pretty good, but it seems like compared to some of my months before, like that's a lower ratio for me to only have that many 5 stars. So we're gonna go ahead and get into it. Instead of doing a mid-month wrap up this month, I think I was sick in the middle of the month. That's when I was sick, and so I didn't film that, so we're just gonna do it all right now. So get yourself a drink, we're gonna be here for a while. But seriously, I'll try to keep it brief. I'm gonna be talking more about the books that I didn't mention in my vlogs, but yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So the first book that I read for the month was The Devil in Her Bed by Kerrigan Byrne. I actually had an e-arc of this, but I had pre-ordered it because I love Kerrigan Byrne and I want to own all of her books, and I have learned that her books have sometimes gone out of print and are then very hard to find. So I wanted a whole set. This is the last book in the series, so I pre-ordered it, and I'm not sad about that at all. So I gave this book 3 stars. This is my least favorite book in the series, and I was honestly a little bit disappointed with this. I mean, obviously you can tell if I gave it a 3-star. Okay, so this book this is the 3rd book in her, is it the Red Rogue series? Or the Devil May Know series, but the women in it, the heroines, are called the Red Rogues. This one follows Francesca, who is the one whose story I have been really most interested to get. I feel like she's always had this mysterious backstory, and she's always seemed very cutthroat, and I really wanted to know why and what made her tick. So we get her backstory, we find out what happened when she was a child and what set her on her path to become one of the Red Rogues. And now we are here, she is a grown woman and she's trying to finally find the person responsible for killing her family, and she's very, very close to finding out who it is and bringing them to justice. She ends up meeting the Devil of Dorset, who is basically just a blackguard, and you don't want to mess with him at all. And he is very good at having multiple disguises and really disguising who he is. They end up meeting, and they are, of course, both tremendously struck with one another. There's a really big mystery about who the Devil of Dorset is, which you know right away who it is, but I don't want to spoil it in case you want to be surprised, because that's the fun part. So they end up having a relationship. They have a lot of conflicted feelings for one another, and it's really, like, I really enjoyed their relationship except for one key thing, and that is that the Devil of Dorset is under the impression that Francesca is somebody else for the entire time that they are together, until the very end when he learns who she actually is. And then he's like, oh yeah, I love you. And I just was like, that was so disappointing to me. I could not understand how he went from thinking she was somebody else and being in love with that woman to then being like, oh, you're not who I thought you were. I still love you anyway. You know, like, it seemed really, really fast, and it just was really upsetting to me. I also will say that this, like, the main plot was a little bit slow in the middle. Like, the middle kind of dragged. The beginning and the end were very fast-paced and very fun to read, but the middle dragged, and also, like, the main plot, the main villain, was so kind of out there that it was a little strange. And the villain was very obvious, and it was settled like that, like, I don't know. So I was definitely disappointed with the way this ended, and I think this may even be smaller than the other two. But it was still enjoyable to read because it's Kerrigan Byrne and I really love her writing style, but it was definitely the least satisfying of all 3 and probably one of the weakest conclusions to a series that I've read, so I was disappointed in this. Okay, the next book that I read was Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. This book follows August, who is a basketball player, and Iris, who is a girlfriend of another basketball player, and these two basketball players are big time, huge rivals. They have been since college, and they do not get along one bit. August and Iris end up meeting when she is actually still with this other man, and nothing happens between them. There's no cheating, but they have this really big connection, and August just cannot forget about her for years. This is another one of Kennedy Ryan's just beautifully powerful, moving love stories that spans years, and it was fantastically well done, and I loved these characters. I loved watching them fight and struggle, but still hope that they would be able to be together and experience their love. It was just so beautiful. This is probably one of the heavier books. I mean, Kennedy Ryan, she doesn't write light books. Like, this was a heavy read. It was so beautiful and so worth it though, but I would definitely say there's a trigger warning for sexual assault, domestic abuse. This is a heavy book, so make sure that if you need those trigger warnings that you go into that prepared. But for me, it was a 5-star read, one of my favorite Kennedy Ryans, just absolutely amazing. Loved it so much. Okay, and the next book that I read was her Wicked Marquess by Stacey Reed. This is the second book in this series, the Sinful Wallflower series. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I really loved this. Every time I pick up another book by Stacey Reed, I am just honestly just shook and blown away at the scope of her talent. She is an incredible historical romance writer. She's one of my favorites who is currently writing today. I can always count on having some really depth to her relationship and to the emotion that is in her love stories. I can count on having a lot of passion, and I can count on there being some darker themes that are handled beautifully. And I just cannot get enough of her writing. I loved this book so much. This book follows our heroine, Miss Marianne Fitzwilliam, who she's a young wallflower. Actually, she's a young wallflower of the ton, and she is trying to get out of an arranged marriage that her parents have set up with her to be married to this older, like 60-year-old older man that she does not want to be a part of at all. So she tries to find a plot to get herself ruined so that this man will not want her at all. She ends up seeing the Marquess escaping from the bedchambers of another woman, and to take advantage of that, she starts to spread this rumor that the bedchamber he was escaping from was her own, so that she could be ruined and be free of marrying this 60-year-old terrible man. And the Marquess goes along with this for his own reasons, of course, and this one also, I would say, has trigger warnings for sexual assault, and it is definitely a darker historical romance, but it is so beautifully handled, and these two characters were just fantastic. And this hero specifically, he was very damaged and really trying to do the right thing, but in like a very vigilante sort of way where you know it's not the right thing, but also you want him to bring these people to justice, and their romance was lush and beautiful, and I loved it so much. I can't talk enough about it. It was a 5-star read. Fabulous. Alright, the next book that I read was Bound by Honor by Cora Riley. I ended up giving this 3 stars, and this was also pretty disappointing for me. I have heard so much about this series, and specifically about Cora Riley, and I had really high expectations going into this. Well, I want to preface that by saying that I kind of had a feeling I wasn't gonna love it, but I also was hoping to love it a lot because I know it's very well loved by a lot of people, and maybe even if this book isn't well loved, I know this series is, but this was just kind of a miss for me. I gave this 3 stars, and I feel like I was being pretty generous to give it 3 stars because I feel like it's really not that great. And I have heard that books in this series get better as we go along, and I haven't decided if I'm going to continue on with the series or not, because honestly, I really don't know how I feel about reading more when I kind of think I'm probably not gonna like it. So this book is about Arya, who is a mafia princess, and she is in an arranged marriage to Luca, who is like the head of the mafia in... where is it at? Okay, he's the future Cabo for the New York Mafia. So it's an arranged marriage that is supposed to bring an alliance between these two warring families. And I didn't like the heroine, and I feel like that's a pretty common thing. Like, she is definitely whiny, she's very immature, she really isn't a great heroine, and I feel like it's very hard to get behind a book when you dislike either the hero or the heroine. It's just sort of like... And the hero was good, you know, he was good. He wasn't great. He was fine. I don't know, like, this book starts out when she's very young, and I know that's common in mafia romance. This isn't my first mafia romance, but I just didn't really love this. I felt like it was very, very basic. I felt like it was a little bit boring. I didn't feel like there was much depth at all to the characters or the story, and especially not the romance. I felt like it just didn't work for me on a lot of levels. I can understand the appeal. I feel like the plot is interesting. I think that the mafia world is interesting, but this one was just really unforgettable. It was really forgettable for me. I just didn't love it, and I don't know if I'm going to keep reading in the series. I know it's very well loved, so I don't mean to hurt anyone's feelings, but I didn't like this at all. Okay, and the next book that I read was Hook. This is a contemporary romance. This is a dark romance by Gina Maxwell, and this is actually an MM romance too. So this is sort of a retelling, it's a contemporary retelling of the Peter Pan elements. So we have our hero Hook, who is the pirate. He is part of this gang of pirates who are doing kind of things that are not really above the law. They're not really drug dealers, but they're definitely like not doing good things. And then we have John Darling, who is part of the FBI, who comes in to try and be an underground operative to work with Hook to bring about the capture and bringing down, oh my heck, Croc. I couldn't think of his name. The crocodile. He is the bad guy in this. He is a drug dealer. He is a sex trafficker. He is a bad man. This book really has some trigger warnings for sexual assault, sex trafficking, drug abuse, you know, drug dealing. It goes into dark places. I ended up giving this book I gave this book 3 stars, but I think that on reflection, I think I'm going to move this up to a 4, maybe 3.5 or a 4, because I loved the romance and I loved the relationship between Hook and John, but I really felt like the writing I had a little bit of an issue with the writing. It was really not great. It wasn't the kind of writing that flows and is easy to read. It seemed very elementary, and it seemed a little bit overdramatic in places, but the overall story of Hook and John and their romance was really beautiful, and I loved that. So I think this is probably a 3.5 star. I rated it as 3 stars, but the romance itself was really well worth it, and I enjoyed that. Okay, the next book that I read was A Beastly Kind of Earl by Mia Vinci. This was a historical romance. This was a really beautiful, really fun historical romance, and I think that this is an author that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. This book was picked for me to read by Samantha at Books with Samantha. She picked Hook for me too to read. I have a reading vlog where I talk about all of those, and I had a really fun time. I enjoyed all of the books she picked for me. This one in particular was something that I really, really loved, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling in a historical romance setting where we have our heroine named Thea, who is masquerading as her sister to try and make sure that her sister doesn't have to marry this Earl, who is scarred. He's really grumpy and he's just a gruff guy, and Thea doesn't want her sister to have to marry him. So they end up in this sort of plot where she's posing as her sister. The Earl ends up recognizing right away that she's not who she says he is, but he's going along with it so that he can marry her and get an inheritance. And of course, they end up falling in love. This book was really, really fun. I thought that the writing was great. I felt like it had a lot of fun banter. It really kind of reminded me of a Tessa Dare level banter. It was just really fun and enjoyable, and if you like a grumpy sunshine trope, I would definitely recommend this. If you like good banter in your historical romance and you're looking for that, I would recommend this too. It was well worth the read. It's on Kindle Unlimited, 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book I read was A Rogue to Remember by Emily Sullivan. This I also read as an ARC, and then I loved it so much that I bought myself a physical copy. This is about Lottie and Alec, who grow up as childhood friends through Lottie's uncle. Alec is sort of his uncle's ward. He's taking care of him, and so they grow up becoming friends, and then of course that develops into more feelings as Lottie comes of age and enters the ton and is ready to do her first season. But her uncle does not want Alec to have anything to do with her in terms of a romantic relationship, and ends up by separating them. Alec ends up leaving. Now, Lottie ends up having to get married, as is very common. Her uncle is kind of pushing her to get married. She really doesn't want to get married, and so she ends up creating a sort of a made-up scandal where she's been ruined, and then she flees to Italy to escape getting married. Alec ends up tracking her down in Italy because her uncle is dying, and he wants him to go and find Lottie. When he gets there, he does find Lottie, thinks that she's actually ruined, realizes that she's not. It was just a plot so she wouldn't have to marry, and they end up taking this little journey around Italy to come home to Lottie's uncle. It was so beautiful, you guys. Like, Alec pines for Lottie so much. It was so great. And I loved the setting of Italy. I loved how they were like touring it, and it was just very atmospheric, very beautiful, very fun. I adored it. I loved their relationship too, because they were just friends, and so they had some good banter in there, but also like she has feelings for him too. They're unrequited, and she thinks he doesn't have feelings for her, and it was just really great. It was a 5-star read. I enjoyed it. This is one of my favorite debut historicals, and I would definitely recommend it. Okay, and the next book that I read was Wicked Intentions by Elizabeth Hoyt. I have been wanting to read this series forever. I have all of them in paperback, but I really wanted the audio, so I put this on hold at my library like 2 months ago, and it finally came in. So I dropped everything and listened to the audiobook, and I really loved it. I gave this book 5 stars. I think it was very unique. I thought it was so tightly plotted. I really loved the complex characters and relationships, and I think it was just a really fun world that I enjoyed tremendously. This book we follow Lord Care, who is sort of he's known for, the back of the cover says that he is known for his wild sensual needs, but he is also trying to track down a killer in the streets of St. Giles. He ends up running into Temperance, who is a widow, and she's overseeing like this home where they take care of children who have been orphaned. But her problem is that they are running out of money, and she needs to find a benefactor to help this home stay afloat so she can keep taking care of these children. Now, Care ends up seeing Temperance, and they end up having this agreement where she will help him sort of navigate the streets of St. Giles, and he will help her find a benefactor for this home. There's a lot of mystery, there's a lot of intrigue, there are definitely some darker themes, there are morally gray characters. This series is such a fun ride, and I really, really enjoyed it. I loved the complexity in the relationship between these two characters and watching them very slowly, hesitantly, but also passionately fall in love. It was so great. I loved it. 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was A Stranger in My Arms by Lisa Kleypas. This was our March book for the Rake Appreciation Society that I do with my friend Jen from the Book Refuge. This was one of Lisa Kleypas's older historical romances, and it's also a standalone. And I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. It was a lot of fun. It was really mysterious and complex, and it was a good time. So in this book, we follow Laura, who is a widow. She has been married, and it was a very unhappy marriage, and her husband was not good to her at all. He ends up traveling, and they believe that he is lost at sea. Many years pass. Laura is running out of money. She's staying with other family members, and she's really worried about what is going to happen with her future because she doesn't have any money. And lo and behold, her supposed dead husband shows up, looks just like him, but acts completely different. And she wants so badly for this changed man to be her husband. But there is some doubt as to, is he really back from the dead, or is this some guy posing as her husband? And if so, why? It was fun. It was mysterious. It was a good time. I enjoyed it. It wasn't one of my favorite of her reads. I felt like it was slightly unsatisfying towards the end, but it was still really good and enjoyable. Alright, and the next book that I read is the one paranormal romance that I read, and that is Dark Sky by Cressley Cole. I am slowly making my way through the series. I'm nearly finished. I do have some books that I need to go back and read, and a few in the future. But I really enjoyed this one. This is one of my favorite out of the whole series. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. It follows Lanthe, who is a sorceress who we know from future books. We've seen her in there. And it also follows Thronos, who is a reckoner. and so he has wings, and these two, of course, are mortal enemies, as is common in the Immortals After Dark series. But the thing that I really loved about this is that they were actually childhood friends. They were childhood friends, so you get to see them start out as children and then grow up to become enemies. You know, like, she believes that he's hunting her, but she can't forget him, and he is hunting her, but he also has all these complex feelings for her, and it was just so fun. It was such a good time. I just really loved it. It was great. Alright, the next book that I read is Daddy Crush by A. Anders. I really enjoyed this too. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. This one is a little bit shorter. It's probably, I think it's probably a novella length. It only took me a few hours to read. It follows Carl and Jerusha, who are neighbors, and Carl, the opening scene is Carl sort of saving Jerusha from this guy who won't take no for an answer at her door. And it was very, very, very fun. It was very delicious. This is an older man, younger woman trope, and Jerusha is very much like a sheltered virgin, and Carl is this worldly guy, but he's also this gruff blue-collar guy who's gonna, like, teach her, and it was so good. Like, he was a perfect stern brunch daddy, and it was just, honestly, like, I really, really loved it. The only reason I gave it 4 out of 5 stars is just because, like, I just wanted more, which is typically how I feel in novellas. It's like, this is so good, but I just wanted a little bit more. Like, it didn't quite satisfy me, but it was still, like, really great. I super enjoyed it. It was very fun. Alright, and the next book that I read is Refrain from Kennedy Ryan. This is the 3rd book in her Soul series. This whole series follows Ryson, who is Bristol's brother that we learn about in the Grip trilogy. Follows Ryson and his love interest, Kai. Kai is a singer and a dancer, and she's trying to make her way in the world to be a, you know, famous musician and performer. And Ryson is a piano prodigy, and he is already very famous, very well known. He is sort of made it on his own. So the whole series is their really epic and grand love story. And it is just such a beautiful and compelling book. I feel like we get a lot of a look at how a famous type of relationship would work, and it's really just so good because Ryson just loves her so much. I'm doing a really bad job at explaining this, but Ryson is one of those type of heroes that I think Kennedy Ryan does really well, where he is alpha, but he is so tender and protective and concerned with her, and that is my favorite type of hero, and I think Kennedy Ryan does that so well pretty much in all of her books. Like, all of her heroes are like that. They have a lot of respect and a lot of love and tenderness for the heroine, but they're also so alpha and ready to just go to war to defend their women, and it's just great. I love it. So I gave this one 5 stars. This one is actually my favorite in the series, even though it's the shortest. It was so good. Okay, the next book that I read is Hookshot by Kennedy Ryan. This was also fantastic. Clearly, I gave this one 5 stars too. Absolutely loved it. I am trying to decide, like, I can't decide, do I like this one or Longshot more? I did start the middle one, Blockshot, but I DNF'd it because it does have cheating in it. I think I will likely revisit it in the future. I got 60% of the way into it, and I just decided it probably wasn't a good read for me at that time. But I also want to read all of Kennedy Ryan's books, so I'm going to come back to that one. But let's talk about Hookshot. So Hookshot follows Keenan and Lotus. Lotus we meet in Longshot, and she's a character that we know and love already, and I was very, very, very excited to get her story. There is also a little bit of an age gap in here between Keenan and Lotus. It's not much, but it's mentioned in the book, and it doesn't really feel like it's much of an issue, but it was there. And Keenan is recently divorced. His ex-wife has cheated on him, and he's really struggling to sort of make peace with that. He has a daughter that is living with him sometimes, and he ends up meeting Lotus and just completely falling for her. I really loved this book. It also has trigger warnings for sexual assault and sexual abuse, and watching Lotus overcome the trauma that she has experienced, and watching Keenan really fight for her and work for her and do what is best for her. And I loved watching Lotus really grow in this book. I feel like we see her as a really strong woman in Longshot, but in this book she really takes it to another level, and their romance, it was so good. Like, Keenan just wants her from the minute he sees her, and she's a little bit hesitant to be with him for reasons that are understandable, that you will learn as you read the book. And there comes a point in the book where they make a choice to, do they stay together and risk it, or do they separate and try and come back in the future? And it was a little bit gut punching, but it was just so beautiful and well done, and it's one of my favorite, I mean, I love all of Kennedy Ryan's books, let's be serious, but this one was fabulous, 5 stars. Alright, the next book that I read was Coldhearted Rake by Lisa Kleypas. This is the first book in the Ravenels series, and this book follows Devon Ravenel and, oh shoot, Lady Kathleen. Lady Kathleen has recently been widowed, and she is trying to take care of this home that she has been left to, but of course they're running out of money. Devon ends up inheriting, Devon is a Ravenel, he ends up inheriting the estate where Kathleen is living. It is just full of debt, and also there are the late Earl's 3 sisters who are also Ravenels that he is kind of responsible and taking care of as Devon takes over this estate. And so this book was a 3-star read for me. This is so far my least favorite Lisa Kleypas book. I really didn't love the hero. I felt like he was just a little bit too much for me. Like, he was a little bit too hard, he was a little bit too rough, he was a little bit too domineering. Not rough really, but just like domineering, and I don't know. I also just felt like their romance was just way too rushed. Like, they went from not liking each other to having this big attraction to not liking each other to being in love with each other, and I was just like, I don't believe it, you know? But it was still really well written, and you get a lot of information about the next book and the whole family of the Ravenels, so if you're going to read this series, I would probably recommend that you read this book too, if you're gonna, because you're gonna want to have all that information. But this is not Lisa Kleypas at her best, for sure. So 3 stars. Alright, the next book that I read is When Ashes Fall, and this book is about, I don't even remember the names of the hero and the heroine. So this book that is sold as one woman being in love with 2 men at the same time. So I was thinking we were either going to have like a love triangle or a poly type of relationship, and we don't really get either of those. I felt like it was pretty misrepresentative, and I was definitely disappointed. This is about a woman who falls deeply in love with this man, and she keeps feeling it's complicated, but then she also meets this other guy, and she might be falling in love with him too. There's no cheating, but it was definitely unsatisfying. It was a really short read. I ended up giving this 2 stars. This was my most disappointing read of the month. Didn't really like this one at all. Okay, the next book that I read was The Wallflower Rager by Tessa Dare. This book was a 5-star read for me. It was super fun, very happy, very lighthearted, but I would say there is also content warning for a talk of sexual abuse in here towards the end. It's not graphically on page, but it is mentioned there. And I think that a lot of times we recommend Tessa Dare for being a comfort, fun, lighthearted read, and while this definitely was for me, I also wanted to say that that was in there in case that may deter anybody from reading it. So this book follows Lady Penelope, who is definitely a wallflower and is sort of considering herself to be a spinster. She loves animals and takes in animals to her home and adopts them and cares for them. She has a vast menagerie of animals. And then the hero, Gabriel Duke, ends up moving in next door. He's very much a rake and a scoundrel, and he does not want anything to do with these animals who are right next door to him. So Penelope and Duke make a deal that if he helps her find good homes for these animals, then she will get rid of them so they won't have to be there anymore. It was very fun. It had a road trip. It was just a good time. Very lighthearted, very fun. You can't go wrong with Tessa Dare, honestly. Okay, the next book that I read is Scoundrel of My Heart by Lorraine Heath. I also read this as an ARC, but loved it so much that I bought myself a copy. This is one of my favorite historical romances that I have read in a long time. It is full of pining and longing, and just the romance in here. Oh, it was perfectly done romance in here where it had a lot of passion and a lot of longing and a lot of connection, and it was just beautiful. And the way this hero loved the heroine, it was so good. I loved it. I know I'm gushing, I can't help it. I loved and adored it. It was 5 stars. This is everything that I want in a historical romance. I guess I should tell you what it's about. This is about Lady Catherine, who must marry a titled gentleman in order to inherit a cottage that her grandmother has left to her. And we also follow Griffith, who is the spare in his family. He is the second son, and so he will not inherit, and he kind of has to deal with that throughout the whole of his book, and he's a little bit bitter about it. They end up meeting and being friends because Catherine is friends with Griff's sister, but they end up meeting and really having a lot of, like, sparks and feelings, but Lady Catherine knows that she can't be with him because she wouldn't be able to inherit, and he struggles with that because he knows that he wouldn't be able to give her everything that she needs. They end up being separated by a scandal that really rocks Griffith's world, and she ends up engaged to a duke. But years pass, he comes back into the story, a very damaged hero, and they just cannot be denied their attraction and their love. It's beautiful, it's perfect. 5 stars, loved it. Next book that I read was another Lorraine Heath, and that is Texas Destiny. This is my first Texas historical romance. This follows our heroine, oh my gosh, I can't remember names. This follows Amelia, who is going to be a mail-order bride for Dallas, who is, like, he owns a lot of land in Texas, so I'm assuming he's like a rancher. It's really, that part was really fun to watch that sort of Texas side of the plot take place. She ends up going out to meet Dallas and travel to his place. It takes several days for them to travel there. But waiting for her is not Dallas, it's his brother Houston. Houston is a scarred hero from the war. He's got a lot of trauma and a lot of damage, and he's very self-conscious of his scars, and he doesn't think that anyone will like him or anyone will see past them, and Amelia really does, and as they are traveling to Amelia's home, she ends up developing feelings for Houston, and she doesn't really know what she's going to do when she meets Dallas and how she's going to marry the brother of the man that she thinks she has fallen in love with. This was really good. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was a very fast-paced read. It was very fun. It was very engaging. It had a very homey, old-fashioned feeling to it. It was really fun. We're going to talk about this at the Rake Appreciation Society live show, which is the second Tuesday in April here on my channel. I'm sorry, it's the second Thursday, so I think it's April 8th at 6 p.m. MST, my channel. Live show. Okay, the next book that I read is His Muse by Twyla Turner. This is a contemporary romance. It is an older woman, younger man contemporary romance, and it was really, really beautiful. I had really high hopes for this book, and I felt like the first 3/4 of this was beautiful and perfect, and it was going on its way to be my new favorite book of the year, maybe. But then something happened at the end that was, the third act conflict that drew our couple apart, and that hurt me so much that I changed my rating from a 5 star to a 3 star, and it kind of breaks my heart to say that because it was such a beautiful book. They do end up getting a happily ever after, but the way that they get it was honestly pretty upsetting to me, and I really didn't love it. This book follows Taryn, who is the older woman. She's 44. She's divorced. Her husband has cheated on her. She has a grown daughter who just graduated college, and so she decides that she's going to move to Paris to start a new life, have just basically a fresh start, and start a business that's going to be like a travel company for Black women from America to come and tour France. She ends up meeting Etienne, our hero, who is 29, at one of his gallery shows where she just falls in love with his artwork. He ends up painting Black women, and he is completely smitten with her from the moment he lays eyes on her. He wants her and desires her above all else, and their romance was so beautiful and powerful and lovely, and if I could go back and just read the first 3/4 of it and then stop, I would, and then it would be 5 stars because it was perfect and he was a wonderful hero, but the ending, it was a bummer. Alright, and the next book that I read was also an ARC, and it was The Most Eligible Viscount in London by Ella Quinn. This is the second book in her series of historical romances, and this book follows Viscount Gavin and Lady Georgie. Viscount Gavin and Lady Georgie are like, I always struggle with what's the word, like, he's courting her and she's expecting a proposal for marriage. So the book opens when he proposes to Georgie. And as he proposes and keeps talking, she begins to realize that this is absolutely a business transaction for him, where she believed that he had feelings for her. So she asks him, "Do you love me?" He splutters, can't answer, and she runs off in tears. Come to find out, Gavin has sworn that he will never love a woman because of what happened with his father and his mother when his father was devastated and his family was ruined by the death of his mother because he loved her so much. It's very reminiscent of Anthony from The Viscount Who Loved Me. Oh my gosh, where is my brain? The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn, but that one was done better. This book was pretty disappointing to me. I gave this 2.5 stars, rounded up to 3 on Goodreads. It was very, very, very slow. It was very wordy. It was very much lacking in emotional development between these two characters and their romance. And this author does something that is a big hang-up in mine, and that is that she really leans heavily into telling you instead of showing, and it really snaps you out of the story and makes it not a great reading experience. So 2.5 out of 2.5, rounded up to 3 stars. Didn't like it. Alright, and the last 2 books of the month that I read were more in the Maiden Lane series. So I read the second book in the Maiden Lane series, Notorious Pleasures. This book follows Lady Hero and Griffin. Oh my gosh, I can't keep these characters' names straight. This book follows Lady Hero, who we have met in the first book, and she also comes in the third book. We hear mentions of these characters all throughout this very big, very long series. Lady Hero is really basically this paragon of virtue where she is trying very hard to get all vice and sin taken out of St. Giles because she believes that's what is causing all of these orphans to happen is vice and sin, and specifically like drink and all that other stuff. And then we also have our hero Griffin, who she ends up meeting very interestingly in the first scene. He is with a married woman and she catches him there. Come to find out, he is actually the brother of the man that Hero is engaged to, and Griffin is really known for being a scoundrel and a rake. Griffin and Hero have this big attraction, and Griffin thinks that she is too good for his brother, that she's just this wonderful, perfect person, and as her wedding date approaches, they try and break it up, of course, and so let me tell you, I didn't like this book. I gave this 3 stars, which was mostly because of how much I admire Elizabeth Hoyt's ability to write such a great, compelling, plotted book. Like, I was still really invested in the plot. I wanted to know what was happening. You end up finding out more about characters that will come into play in future books, so I still think it's a worthwhile read. It just is one of my least favorite books of hers, and especially in the series. And a lot of that is because there's a lot of cheating that happens in here, but also I just didn't really believe in these 2 characters, and I didn't really believe in their romance. It just felt just purely driven by lust, which I feel like Elizabeth Hoyt sometimes can lean into that, but I feel like she can lean into that, but she ends up pulling it around so that I do believe that they had a really great love story, but not here. I just didn't like this book. I still liked it. I'm rambling. 3 stars, not my favorite. You kind of need to read it to know what happens about future characters if you're interested in the overall plot of the world and there's this great big mystery. So anyway, 3 stars. I've rambled a lot. Okay, and the last book that I read is Scandalous Desires by Elizabeth Hoyt, which is book 3 in the Maiden Lane series. This book follows Mickey, who is a pirate, and our heroine Silence. So Silence is a widow, and she has been ruined, and it has been really, really heartbreaking how she was ruined and what drew her and her husband apart, and Mickey plays a part in that, actually, which is one of the reasons why I didn't love this romance. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I still liked it better than the second, but it isn't my favorite in the series so far. I still really loved the first book, Wicked Intentions, best. But this book was still very fast-paced, very, very well plotted, very intricately woven together. It really deals with some dark themes that are very deftly handled, and that also really weave in a lot of different story threads that are going to come into play throughout the book and throughout the rest of the series. And I feel like Elizabeth Hoyt really pulled off what is one of my favorite heroes, where they're really this kind of terrible, domineering, tells the woman what to do, and is not a real great guy, kind of a gruff alpha. You don't really love them in the beginning, but by the end, he's so in love with her and is such a soft, squishy marshmallow for her. I loved that type of hero, and she really did that great with Mickey here. And Silence is a heroine that I really, really love. I felt like she's very protective of these children. She ends up having this relationship with Mary, who is actually Mickey's daughter. She's this baby and she wants to take care of her, and that's how Mickey and her sort of end up together, because Mickey says he's going to take Mary away. Oh, but Silence, if you want to come too, you can come too. So Silence goes because she doesn't want to be separated from Mary. So this one was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this a lot. It just, like I said, like that beginning, that of the hero, I didn't really love that type of hero. I felt like I'm just so over that type of hero. I don't want to see I just get tired of that trope where they're just so domineering, gonna tell the woman what to do. I'm just like, I don't like it. It's just not fun for me. I do enjoy watching his eventual progression into really being concerned with our heroine and her wants and needs, but it just took a very, very, very long time to get there. And I definitely felt like with a lot of these books, sometimes the plot can be a little bit slow and a little bit hard to really get into, but it was still really good. This is still a very worthwhile series. It's just, again, this one wasn't my favorite. So that is my very long wrap up. I hope that you enjoyed watching that. I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts and feelings about these books. I felt like I read some very memorable books, some that were misses, a lot that are brand new favorites that I'm super happy about. So let me know if you've also read any of these and what your thoughts were on them, or you can let me know what your favorite book of March was, or if you just want to show my support that you watched, feel free to leave me any type of flower emoji. That would be great too. Thank you so much for watching, my friends. I will see you in my next video.